Welcome to a special edition of the Darden Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'd like to share our latest installment from our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series, a series we call Office Hours, with a conversation with Jared Harris. Jared is a member of the Strategy, Ethics, and Entrepreneurship faculty here at the Darden School of Business, and we had a long conversation about his background, what led him to Darden, what got him interested in strategy as well as ethics, his strategy course, and how he's incorporated artificial intelligence in the course, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Jared Harris. Today, we're joined by a member of the Strategy, Ethics, and Entrepreneurship faculty, Jared Harris. Jared, thanks for doing this.
I'm happy to be here. Love talking to prospective students. I'm in my 20th year at the Darden School, so I guess you could say I'm a fan.
Well, we're great to have you here, and we're going to have a really interesting conversation. So, Jared, first question, tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you?
Well, we're going back to my roots. As I mentioned, I'm beaming at you from my hometown here, and you know, I never dreamed back in my childhood days in Idaho Falls, Idaho, that someday I'd be a professor at the Darden School, and I'm on a Zoom with a bunch of prospective students. That would have been hard for me to imagine. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My father is aging and is in June will turn 99 years old. So I'm here kind of checking on him this week. I was an accounting undergraduate major, and I had a minor in music. So that sort of captures my split personality, I suppose you could say. And as mentioned, I came to Darden School 19 years ago and have been here ever since, and hope I'll never leave. And we can talk more about some of what I do. But my initial, being on the faculty is, I guess you could think of it as a bit of a career change for me. My first career was in finance and accounting. I was a CPA, worked in the accounting world and finance. I ended up in kind of a sort of a specialty consulting practice as part of one of the big firms back then. There were the big 6 firms, they called them. So that'll date me a little bit. And then I left consulting and accounting to be the chief financial officer for a little startup company. So I was part of the executive team leading a little high-tech startup. So that was pretty exciting. And then decided to go back to graduate school and get a PhD. And I did that at the University of Minnesota. So I endured 4 Minneapolis winters and then have been at the Darden School ever since. My PhD program was in strategy and ethics, so that was a sort of switch for me from finance and accounting into strategy and ethics, and that's what I've been doing at Darden ever since. So here I am.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know about the accounting background. I always learn things on these sessions. What attracted you to strategy and ethics? Those two topics.
Yeah, good question, Brett. Actually, it was my professional experience. So I learned early on that I wasn't cut out to be a lock, stock, and barrel accountant. That was not for me. Even though I had a bachelor's and a master's degree in it, I ended up gravitating I initially started my career at Coopers and Lybrand, which merged with Price Waterhouse into the firm we now know as PwC. So I was there through that merger. During my years there, I had gravitated into sort of what we would now think of as more of a consulting area. It wasn't exactly management and strategy consulting like McKinsey or Bain or BCG would do, but it was closer to that than the sort of traditional accounting work. So I got to interact with lots of different kinds of companies, and I found that quite fascinating. But it was really when I left all of that to help be part of the leadership team at this little startup company. I think I was the 10th employee, Vecna Technologies. They're still doing great. They at the time, we did a lot of kind of custom software consulting, but they've since gotten more into robotics work. They do a lot of work in that space now. But I think that experience was what really was a light bulb moment for me. I fell in love with kind of the questions that I now understand to be questions that involve strategy. I loved making. There were sort of four of us that were leading that firm, and I just found it endlessly fascinating. The accounting and the finance part of my job wasn't as interesting to me as the sort of questions around competitive strategy. How do we position relative to competitors? What is it we want to do and not do? And so that was really, I think, where my interest in strategy came from. Was my kind of boots on the ground professional experience in the workforce. But I will also say that itself wasn't enough to make. I'm not sure. I wasn't sure that I loved strategy enough to go back and get a 4-year PhD in it. I was still uncertain, and I had a momentous conversation with someone, and I was kind of expressing that I kind of was feeling this pull to go back into the classroom and go to academia, but I knew I didn't want to get a PhD in finance or accounting, but I could imagine doing it strategy, but I wasn't sure. And they asked me a really it turned out to be a profound question. I said, well, when you think back on your, essentially your MBA, when you think back to your master's program, what's the class that you found the most fascinating? Maybe that's the thing you ought to study as a PhD. And I said, well, that's easy. That was my business ethics class. And but I said, but you can't get a PhD in that. And then I was like, wait a second, can you get a PhD in that? Turns out you can. So for me, I found a program that allowed me to marry strategy and ethics and study those things together. I studied under a really renowned scholar in business ethics named Norm Bowie. He's retired now, but total legend, one of the founders of the entire academic field of business ethics. So I got to study with him, which was great. And I had a co-advisor named Phil Bromley, who's now at UC Irvine, also total legend in strategy. So I got to put all that stuff together, and that's kind of my story of how I ended up where I am. And that, I guess, maybe anticipating what you might ask next, Brett, that led me kind of inexorably to Darden, because Darden was a place where I could also put those things together. I'm in the strategy, ethics, entrepreneurship area at the school, and I teach courses in both business ethics and in strategic management. So that's Darden has been a place that's allowed me to continue to sort of put those two deep interests together in my research and in the classroom, and so that it's been a fabulous place for me.
It's interesting to hear you mention your business ethics class, and obviously had an impact on you. Business ethics is a required part of the core curriculum here at Darden. What did you love about that class as a student that made such an impression on you?
Oh, no, that's a great question. And my business ethics professor in my master's program at Brigham Young University was what also turned out, I learned later, to be kind of a legend. Kirk Hart was his name, and he was a terrific professor. But the thing that really grabbed me about that was it just struck me that as a student, I got to engage in what I consider to be the really deepest and most important questions about our values, and what does that have to do with business? How do we put business together with values, and thinking about what the right thing to do is, and how do we connect that to putting a business model together that can be profitable, that can create value for a whole range of stakeholders. And so, yeah, that was my first taste of that, was in that MBA business ethics class I had long ago from Kirk Hart. He was really terrific. So that was that was where I think my interest started.
So you mentioned what brought you to Darden, but you've been at Darden 20 years. What's kept you here? What have you enjoyed about being at Darden?
Darden is a special place. There's lots of great programs. I have lots of friends that teach at Michigan and Wharton and Harvard, and lots of places in between. And every program has its strengths. There are lots of terrific programs that have a very different approach than Darden. So I think as a prospective student, it's useful to sort of think about what kind of a learning model you're interested in, what kind of a community you're interested in. And I think the thing that's quite compelling about Darden is that there's such a high touch community between students and faculty. I think that's quite rewarding for those who want that kind of a culture. Not everyone does, but we don't have classes that are taught by by PhD grad students or by, teaching assistants. The faculty are pretty hands-on. It's the kind of place where despite the fact that this webinar is titled Office Hours, it's ironic because at Darden, we don't have office hours. So, lots of my colleagues that teach at other places, when they're in a teaching term, they have office hours, every Tuesday from 10 to 11 are their office hours. That's when the students can access them. Darden is sort of, the expectation at Darden is that when you're teaching, your students can come by and find you. There isn't a defined office hours. My door's kind of open and I've got a set of students that's going to come to my home in a couple of weeks, from a class I taught in the fall. And so it's just, I think it's that kind of place. The learning model, I think, is exciting as well. It's a very participant-centered Socratic learning model. If any of you know anything about Darden, that's probably one of the things is that we're case method teachers. But that pedagogical approach of a kind of Socratic participant-centered experience in the classroom isn't limited just to cases. That's the sort of classic formulation of it. But everything we do is very participant-centered and participative. And it's what you're not going to experience at Darden is a professor punching through a bunch of PowerPoint slides and lecturing to you. No disrespect to my friends that are other places that teach that way, but Darden is a much more, I think, lively classroom environment. And that's based on a lot of research on adult learning that we at the school really buy into. So that's what you get if you're at Darden, is you're part of a community. I think maybe that resonates with you, Brad. I think it's just. Listen. For years, I played in a blues band with faculty and students, and the students rotate in and out, of course, and the faculty players kind of remain, and we have a blast doing that. But I'm not sure that happens at lots of business schools. But Darden's that kind of place.
Yeah, people always ask about the faculty who are here. I would say, as a faculty member, please. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. You don't come to Darden unless you want to be in the classroom with students, available to them outside the classroom. That's sort of, some places, the teaching is something you do so you can go do what you really want to do. Here, it strikes me that faculty are here because they really want to teach. They research and publish and do all of those things that faculty at top business schools do. But the classroom experience is something that they really love and care and are passionate about.
Yeah, that's right. No, and I think there's a self-selection when we're hiring faculty. We're pretty selective on that dimension. All the faculty, the new hires that we bring in are just phenomenal. Our new generation of faculty at the Darden School are just inspiring, and they're brilliant. And they're all doing great research. They're all, thinkers. They're all thought leaders. But if they don't also get a spark from the kind of, learning model we have in the classroom and that kind of engagement with students, this is probably not the perfect place for them. There's other places where teaching is more minimized and you just focus on thought leadership and idea generation. And that's fun. We all love it. But Darden's a place that kind of lives and dies in the classroom. It's a thing.
So you teach strategy in the core curriculum. Tell us a little bit more about how you see this course fitting into the core.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. If I backed up a bit from that, I don't know how much people know about how the core curriculum at Darden is structured, but I might just comment briefly on that. Because it is somewhat unique. It's not entirely unique. There's a few other places that have an integrated, cohort-based, coordinated core curriculum. But that was a mouthful. But let me explain what that means. It means that when you come to Darden as a new student, as a first-year student, you'll go through the entire first year of what we call core classes, but you will do those with your section of students, of classmates. You get sorted into a section of about, 65 to 70 students per section, and you will advance that entire first year of your program with that section. So these become kind of your besties. You get to know them really well. Maybe they're like siblings. Maybe you argue once in a while too. I don't know. But there's a tightness. There's a tight closeness to the sections. And Darden even has a kind of section versus section sort of friendly competition like the Hogwarts houses, And so we'll play soccer or have trivia night or whatever. And there's a point system. And so there's a lot of esprit de corps with each section. But from a curriculum standpoint, what that means is you've got the same group of students that you advance through the entire first half of your program with and kind of in lockstep. But in addition to that, the other 4 residential sections at the school are also advancing, but across the sections, every student at the Darden School does the same set of cases, has the exact same set of case discussions on the same day. So what that requires for the faculty is that behind the scenes, we are coordinated across the sections. So in other words, I'm in a role right now as the course head for the core strategy course. That's why, Brett, you're asking me about that, and I can speak to that in a second. But I used to be the course head for the business ethics course as well. We all, as faculty, we all sort of take turns and roll in and out of those roles. But what it means is I kind of have the final say on picking the cases that we'll use and the pedagogical approach for that core strategy course. But it's not just for the 70 students I teach in Section C. It's for all 5 sections that my colleagues in our teaching team also teach. So we might all be teaching a case on Rivian. I wrote a new case on Rivian this last year. So we did a case on EVs and Rivian. But on the exact same day, on Tuesday of November, whatever, everyone in the first year program at Darden will be doing that case on Rivian. If you're in my section, I'll be your strategy professor. If you're in Section B, you'll have Mike Lennox, who's currently the interim dean of the school, et cetera. So that's the setup. The strategy course comes in the fall. Not right. It isn't in the first half semester. It's in the second half semester. So the latter half of the fall semester, that's when it falls in the curriculum. And the strategy course is a core course that's designed around a set of frameworks and ways of structuring your thinking to think about how does a company determine its competitive strategy and how does it execute on that strategy. So you've got to think about competitors. You've got to think about internal strengths and weaknesses. You have to think about changes that are happening in the broader marketplace, in your industry. And so strategy is every case has a decision that's at the forefront of that case. And you've got to make a decision. And we've written and selected the cases based on the strategic importance of those decisions. It's going to help determine that company's valuable competitive position, hopefully. And so the course is sort of built around that idea. So sometimes we change the pacing of the core curriculum, and a course that maybe was in the fall could move to the spring. We'll try sequencing things slightly differently, but students experience the strategy course at the same time as they're taking 3 or 4 other core courses at the school. So sometimes we even combine and teach the same case, or we teach a joint class, with finance or with operations. And so the idea of the core is for students to really gain a sense of how a particular discipline fits into the larger view, enterprise view of what it takes to run a successful business. And so good strategy is a piece of that, but marketing's a piece of that, operations is a piece of that, leadership and organizational behavior is a piece of it, et cetera. So it's part of the whole, and that's the way the Darden faculty at Teaching the Core kind of approach teaching in the core. I don't know. Is that helpful, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question here. So Jared was talking about the full-time MBA experience. In our executive MBA program, there's about 125, 130 students. We break those students into 2 sections, Section A, Section B, and we shuffle those sections periodically over the course of the first year when students are doing the core curriculum. I know we've got some part-time MBA admitted students, prospective students on this as well. For part-time MBA students, their core is 18 months long, so a little bit longer than for full-time MBA and executive MBA students. And the cool thing about that is it's entirely cohort-based. So you're moving through the core curriculum as a part-time MBA student, but that's 18 months with the same group of people. So different approaches by program, but the core in terms of the classes is always the same across all of Darden's programs. So that base.
Yeah, no, that's Brett. That's brilliant, and I'm glad I see the question. I've opened up the Q&A window, so that you've alerted me to this. This is good. Actually, ironically, I teach one of the sections in the EMBA format, the core strategy course, and serve as essentially the course head for EMBA core strategy as well. And I'm telling you, it's the exact same course. So the pacing is different in EMBA. It's a weekend format program, and there's 2 sections of EMBA, But yeah, we did some things, for instance, with the strategy course this past year. We did some things with incorporating AI, and we did that across the 5 residential sections and the 2 EMBA sections. So 7 sections of core strategy. Sort of test ran some things that I wanted us to try. So anyhow, yeah, Brett's spot on.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, we get a lot of questions from prospective students. It's fair to say, if you look at all the trend information and what prospective students are looking for from MBA programs, they want to know how MBA programs are incorporating AI into the curriculum, how students are learning about AI. So your class, the core strategy class, as you mentioned, you experimented with some things, artificial intelligence in your class. How did you think about approaching that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, about a year ago, I didn't know how to think about it, and I thought we got to do something. It's sort of yeah. I felt that if you're one of the top business schools in the world, it's crucial that the curriculum is robust to stuff that's happening in the world, and the widespread adoption of large language models and generative AI is a huge thing, as I'm sure many of you on the webinar here are well aware. Um, I mean, the data tells us that Gen Zers, consult Chat GPT about, where to go to lunch and how to respond to their significant other's text message. So, I mean, you're probably, you may have more facility with using Gen AI on an ongoing basis for little trivial questions in your lives, maybe even more on the faculty. I mean, and so we're aware of this. And yeah, from my perspective, there's a couple of I will say not competing objectives, but concurrent objectives for a valuable cutting edge MBA program in 2026. I think on one hand, it's crucial, I believe, for Darden students to actually learn something about the topic. In my case, about strategy. If we're talking about the core strategy course, that they can gain some expertise and some facility with internalizing concepts that can help them make better decisions and do better analysis. So in other words, I mean, this is just a long-winded way of saying, if you're paying a bunch of tuition to come to Darden School, we want you to learn something about how to be a better leader and manager and executive. That's the purpose of why we gather. On the other hand, if all I want to do is test what's in your brain, I could design a course that's old-fashioned and we don't use technology, and I test you on how you learned the concepts, and it's in a locked room and you got to write longhand on blue books. Like, I could be really certain that I know what you learned in the class if I do it that way. And if that's the only thing I cared about, I mean, it's, I guess I could see, a rationale to approach teaching the course that way. The problem is there's this other concurrent objective, which is we want to prepare students to be able to lead in the actual world that we live in right now, in which things like generative AI are highly relevant. When you start your job at McKinsey or at Amazon or whatever, on day one, they're going to say, here's our proprietary LLM. Please use this to do your job better. So we also don't want you to come to a program and just learn how to think inside your brain, but not have a real facility with the modern tools that the business is using. So those are kind of I guess my approach this year for the core strategy course, when we sort of redesigned it a little bit, was to try to address both of those objectives. That we wanted to lean into AI because that seems crucial to be relevant in today's world. We better give you some practice. We better, work through what's AI good for? What are its problems? How do you know when it's telling you something true versus something that's made up or hallucinated? These seems like, these are, we want you to gain some facility with using AI, but we don't want that to come at the expense of learning the core ideas. So that's the thing to kind of balance. In other words, we want you to learn something at Darden besides just how to write a good Chat GPT prompt. If that's all you learned in the program, then we haven't done our job. So trying to balance those things is kind of the key. And what we did this year is a couple of things. We opened up the core course. We were the only core course that did this year as a kind of a trial. We opened it up to the use of any kind of generative AI you want to use. If you use Copilot or Gemini or Claude, or if you're a ChatGPT person, like whatever you want to do, use it however you want. Use it to prep for class. Use it to use it on your exam. We just opened it up completely. So that was one thing. But then we did something else. We partnered with Columbia Business School, and we beta tested a custom verbal protocol AI chatbot that we loaded 5 of our cases into out of 14. And part of the assignment on those 5 days was to have a verbal conversation with this chatbot called Casey. And the chatbot is designed to be reasonably polite, but to disagree with you. And so the purpose of that mechanism was to help you mostly to prepare for class, for the class discussions, because you could test out your arguments. You could say, well, I think Netflix should do this versus that. And then the custom chatbot would kind of push back and say, well, have you thought about it this way? And it was really pretty effective at pushing the students on their thinking. And so, so we incorporated that element as well. So that was kind of the, our elements of leaning into AI. We had a lot of discussion about AI use in class and how did it help you? How did it not help you? Did it tell you anything that was weird? Did it tell you anything that you knew was wrong? We certainly got all of those things as well, but that's what you'll experience in the real world with AI. So that's a piece of it. But then, of course, the bulk of the course is still built around these Socratic discussions. And in those discussions, you don't have time to just ask ChatGPT a question before you respond when I ask you something. And so I think there is an element of kind of, holding your feet to the fire and being present in class, being prepared, having read the material and thought about it, engaged with the AI, if that's helpful. But then you kind of have to, unfold your thinking in front of your 69 classmates and your professor. And that's kind of the Darden model. So we tried to sort of put these things together, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's helpful, Brad. I can elaborate on any of that if it would help.
No, it's definitely helpful. I was curious to hear about, you said, okay, you can use whatever AI you want and opening it up completely. I imagine that was maybe a conversation that was had, like maybe some trepidation of doing that. How did that feel from the faculty standpoint?
Yeah, no, I think there's the faculty at the school are grappling with this. I mean, this was an experiment, so I was worried, for example, slightly worried that opening up the use of Gen AI for the final exam would really compress the variance on the exams. We grade the exams blind. I don't know who the students are. We think that's very important. But I kind of worried that's like, oh, maybe every exam is going to kind of look the same. And but I just kind of took that risk to just kind of see. It's like, let's just try this. And it turns out they didn't all look the same. So it really wasn't a problem. It turns out people use Gen AI differently from each other, or they don't use it at all, or they overuse it. I mean, there was plenty of variation in how students responded. So yeah, I think that the faculty at the school are trying to thread this needle of figuring out how to maintain a sort of a traditional model of Socratic instruction where we're all having one conversation in class and it's extemporaneous. There's no lecturing. There's no slides. We're having a conversation about whatever the case is about. And we want that to be, most core class at Darden are laptops down when we're in class. And so there's nowhere to hide really from that standpoint. But we also don't want to be the place that doesn't prepare you to use AI. And so it's kind of trying to put those things together. Yeah, I think the faculty there's other experiments being run at the school, not just in the core strategy course, especially in the elective curriculum in the second year. There's lots of really neat things being done with AI. This was the first sort of stab at like, let's do something in the core, which is kind of a big deal because it's every first year student is going to experience this. So we had to kind of make sure something wasn't going to flop. And it was pretty interesting. We learned quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm curious about what you learned through this, some of the takeaways. For example, will you approach the class differently next year, do you think?
Well, no, that's a great question. We're in the middle of kind of thinking that through. And I so that's a little bit TBD. We may make some more changes, but I think that, I think there were some great moments in class. So here's an example. I'll give you one example. We have a couple of quizzes in the core strategy course, and they're not designed to be tricky or gotcha. They're, if you're reading the cases and reading the background material on the technical concepts and paying attention in class, the quizzes should not be difficult. So they're not designed to trick you or do something strange. But if you're not reading the material, and if you're kind of coasting off your learning team and your classmates, the quizzes might be a little bit challenging. But so we tried to thread that needle with the quizzes. Well, there was a question on one of the quizzes that many of the first year students got wrong. And I initially thought, well, maybe I didn't word the question clearly enough. But I looked back at it and I said, no, it's pretty clear. And it turned out that if you put that question into ChatGPT authoritatively gives you an answer, and it always sounds plausible, but it was dead wrong. I mean, this is one of those examples where ChatGPT was just flat out wrong. And so that was a good learning moment in class, because because again, we opened it. If you want to use Gen AI on your quiz, use it on the quiz. If you want to use it on the exam, use it on the exam. This is the world we're in now, But there are risks to over relying on it. The question becomes, how do you know if ChatGPT is feeding you a bunch of bull versus summarizing something really well for you and hitting the nail on the head? You have to have some level of expertise that allows you to gut check that answer you're getting from Gen AI. And so that was a really good learning moment in class. I put that quiz question up on the screen. I said, does this look familiar? Did a bunch of you miss this? And so, why'd you miss this? And I said, don't answer that. But I'm going to just say, here's the answer from ChatGPT, and this is wrong. Does everyone understand why this is wrong? We went over it, and there was pretty unanimous recognition of what the right answer was. But I think that was a light bulb moment for some of the students of like, oh, this quiz is just a tiny part of my grade. It didn't really matter. It's mostly practice. But it's easy to over rely on Gen AI, and there's risks in doing that. There's a place in what we're doing for genuine expertise. ChatGPT can be wrong, So anyhow, I think I loved seeing some of those moments come out in class.
Yeah, to me, that's one of the really interesting questions about generative AI in education, right? So you see this come up in coding all the time, right? Increasingly talking about all that these tools can do around coding. But people also say, like, if you don't understand the fundamentals, you may not necessarily understand exactly what's happening, or to check it, or to know for sure if it's doing what you want it to do, and all this kind of stuff. Are there vulnerabilities? And so this like baseline level of knowledge or expertise that you have to have. So yes, these can be great tools to augment learning, but there's still knowledge base that's required. And so if you become over reliant on these tools, how do you make sure that people are getting the knowledge base that they need to check these tools? This is one of the sort of big questions I think is implicated at this particular time.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And in the world of educators, not even just business school, but all educators that are in higher education, that is the question of sort of how do you navigate that? And a lot of professors, even of undergraduates, even in the liberal arts, are sort of seeing like, a lot of the chatter in class is kind of all sounding the same. The papers I'm getting turned in are all kind of looking the same. That's the risk of if everyone's just relying on Gen AI to help them write their paper, they can kind of homogenize everything. But I think that's the beauty of, if we go back to this particular course, the strategy course itself is kind of shot through with a lot of ambiguity. There isn't always one obvious right answer. If we're engaging in a case discussion about I'll go back to the case about Rivian. If you're Rivian, what should you do to kind of advance whatever objectives you're trying to advance? If you're trying to become more profitable, if you're trying to gain more market share, and if it's more market share, in which markets? We're in the domestic market in the US has become a little bit politicized around EVs. I suspect that won't last, but the international markets are different altogether because the Chinese players are big players in Europe and Australia and other, so if you're Rivian, you're trying to figure out, well, should I do international expansion? Should I try to make a big play in the EU? That's an interesting strategic idea. Or should we get involved with more B2B plays and try to get more Amazon vans, running Rivian, so it's not consumer sales? There's lots of ways to go here, and I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not all knowing. I don't know what exactly the right thing for Rivian to do is, but the tools and frameworks from strategy are designed to help you sort of think through the second, third order effects and try to make some judgment about what you think, in this case, what Rivian ought to do. And so I think that lends itself pretty well to the give and take of a case classroom discussion, because it isn't so much about finding whatever the quote unquote right answer is. In strategy, there often isn't an exact right answer, but it's more about advancing an argument about what you think an organization should do given the case and given, the expertise that you're gaining, as Brett points out. And there's a role for Gen AI to help you kind of summarize data that could support your arguments, or there's a bunch of stuff that AI could do to help you. But in the end, you kind of got to plant your flag on, here's what I think Rivian should do, or Netflix, or Amazon, or whatever the case is about. And you have to kind of defend that. And you got, and a classmate might then advance an idea that's different than yours. And you have to have the humility and the openness to sort of listen to that and say, oh yeah, that's a pretty good idea. I hadn't thought of that. And that's the magic that happens in the Darden classroom, is this exchange of ideas. So, Gen AI is a tool we've got that can do certain things quickly and can enhance our judgment by putting a bunch of stuff at our fingertips. But if we simply think that we can just ask a chatbot a question and just copy and paste the answer and it's going to be correct, I don't think we're there yet. So that's I think what's fun in class.
Yeah, I want to talk about another course you teach, business ethics through literature, that feels like it's, again, you talk about no right answer. So that's a classic example of very robust, very interesting conversations in that class. I get to help out with a part-time version of this class with Greg Fairchild. And so I'd love to hear about this elective. Tell prospective students a little bit more about that.
Well, that's great. And for those of you that are listening, Brett is being very humble here. Brett is also fills an instructor role at the Darden School sometimes, and he has actually taught this course he's asked me about. And so yeah, this is let's put it this way. This is a very different course than the core strategy course. So when I teach business ethics through literature, it's one of my electives. I have a blast teaching it, and it's a course, at least in my version of it, they read novels and short stories, and I have them listen to a few songs. I have them read a couple of poems. It's a course that's based on fiction. And there's a reason I choose to approach it that way. But literary fiction allows us to think it's a way for us to think about big questions involving values and ethics. And it allows us to approach it in a different way than the core business ethics course, which I've been the course head of. And there's a bunch of great cases and case discussion that unfolds very similar to the strategy course, to be honest. Literature is a different deal. And I think that's a course where I actually encourage the students strongly to not use generative AI. I mean, I have no way of really double checking whether they did or not, but the course is designed to facilitate the students gaining some kind of slow burn insights from sustained attention to something that's not just a 15-page case or 190-minute class. But, when I ask them to read a 500-page novel, that's a big ask. And so I think it turns out there are certain things that we can learn very well from that mode of instruction that you can't actually get as well from a fast-paced case method discussion or, an experiential course or something else. So it's just we read a bunch of fiction and then we talk about the themes that emerge, and the light bulb moments that emerge in that class are oftentimes quite remarkable. And it's a special class. This is actually the group of students that's coming to my house. One of the things I do in that course is I put the students in groups and I make them go share a meal with each other once a week and talk about what's going on, in the course or anything else in their lives. And so I sort of want them to have dinner with each other once a week. And then I say at the end of the course, we will have dinner at the Harris house. And so the course wrapped up in December, but I gave them the option of, we can do this in December before the term ends, before exam week's over. But if you want, we could wait till March or April and it'll be nice out and we can play pickleball in my driveway and cornhole and, you can see the dogs and, and so that's what they chose. So yeah, they're coming over in a week from Saturday. I think I'll have I'll have 40 students at my house with some of them have significant others or spouses. Some of them even have young little kids. And so they'll come over and play with my 3 golden retrievers, and we'll feed them a meal and enjoy that time together. But it's kind of it's a very participant centered learning model, but it's not cases. It's in this case, it's fiction. And I think it is low tech by design, because I think that's becoming a lost art for us. When's the last time you all read a 300 or 400 page novel, and what'd you learn from that? Well, you can do that in my class, and we have a fun time doing it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Starting to hear stories about like classics coming back, philosophy coming back, these sort of more kind of like liberal arts things becoming more popular at undergraduate level, almost in a response to generative AI. So sort of thinking about the relationship between these things.
Well, the cheap and easy way to use AI is to just kind of outsource your thinking and your analysis to AI and over rely on it. I've already talked about why I think that's not what the best leaders and executives and managers of the future are going to do. You've got to do better than that, I think. But as a baseline, I think a lot of people are going to do that. And Gen AI can be right 70% of the time or 80%. It's not a terrible hit rate, but what you miss out on is learning that skill of sort of wrestling with something. And wrestling with something not just quick, but wrestling with something in a sustained way. And so, yeah, I think that it turns out some of these other modes of learning, using fiction and literature, for example, and engaging with that allows you to sort of touch on values in, I believe, potentially the deepest way possible available to us as human beings, other than our own lived experience. So we walk through our lives and we make choices every day involving right and wrong, and we make trade-offs, and we think about, what am I all about? What do I value? I mean, we do this every day, and that's where the rubber hits the road. But think about the last time you listened to a song that it wasn't just had a great beat or whatever, but it inspired you. Or the last time you went and saw a movie that you were just, that you couldn't stop thinking about it afterwards because it touched on something deep in your humanity. Same thing with a novel. I mean, I enjoy reading a beach novel when I'm at the beach, and maybe there's not a lot of depth there, but it's kind of fun. It's a page turn. But when you read something that has more depth to it, it touches on those things that are kind of, part of the soul. And if we want to put it that way. And I've written an academic paper about this, about how literature helps us touch on what I describe as the soul of business, because business is just a human activity with a bunch of us interacting together. And so, yeah, engaging with literature, I think, is increasingly something that humans are doing less and less of. So it can be helpful to have a course that says, okay, here's a reading list. We're going to read this stuff. We're going to talk about it. We're going to ask the deep questions involved. And so, yeah, I think it's, in some ways, it's an antidote to being on your screen all the time. Like, get your head back in a book, and then get a bunch of smart people in the room and say, man, this really challenged me. And, listen to your classmates react. And so I love that course for all those reasons. Yeah.
We have a question here in the Q&A about,
I see that.
How do you manage case discussion? How many people typically will participate over the course of a 75, 85-minute class session? What does that look like from a faculty member's perspective?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really great question. That's a terrific question. And some of it depends on the class session. Sometimes I'll engage with a particular student. I'll cold call a student at the beginning of class and say, walk us through your analysis, and I'll just stick with them. And that student is on the spot for 20 minutes, of an 85-minute class. Like, it could go that way if that's helpful for the class. But oftentimes I move around quite a bit. I think in a typical 85-minute class for me, almost 90-minute class, with 70 students in class, I can frequently get to about 50 to 55 of those students in any given class. So, and I think that's pretty good. And I try to do that. So if there are students who haven't been participating or we haven't heard much from, like, I'll every day before class, I kind of look at my seating chart and I'm like, okay, who haven't I heard from? And I look at my notes from the previous couple of sessions. And I say, okay, I'm going to ask John, and I'm going to ask Carrie, and I'm going to ask, I'm going to sort of try to get some new voices into the conversation. And so I'm pretty conscious of doing that. The Darden faculty have kind of got this down to an art and a science, I think. But you usually can't get to 70 people in 85 minutes. And so you have to kind of play a little bit of a long game across the set of sessions. So if I have someone who really contributed a lot in yesterday's class, and I'm in class and their hand goes up again, I probably won't call on them because Brett's hand goes up and he didn't talk yesterday, and so I'm gonna go to him. That's one of the things the faculty are doing when they're managing the case discussion is you're trying to spread the participation around as much as possible. And you can't get to everyone every class. But I think the class size at Darden, personally, is about right in the core. As 65 to 70 students is good. You always have a few students absent. You can't get to everybody. But if I can get to 50 people in every class session, that's pretty good. I have friends who teach at other business schools that have sections of 100 students. And I have a hard time believing they can get to more than 50 in a class, but now you're just getting to half the class. So I actually like the size of the classroom. I mean, for the core. So I don't know if that's helpful on the case method, managing the case method, but we really try to get as many people as involved as possible. And as a practical matter, it's part of the evaluation of students. Part of your grade is, the sort of quality and contribution of your participation. So it isn't about opening your mouth all the time, but it's when you say stuff that's useful. And some of the most useful things is when a student feels safe enough to advance an analysis that ends up being wrong, or they're not sure of something and they ask a question, say, I don't really understand this. Like from a points perspective, from an evaluation perspective, I reward that much more than a student having a really well thought through answer that's pretty spot on. I mean, that's fine. But I think if you're struggling with something in the class, there's probably 17 other people that don't understand it either. And so I really try to bring that out. So yeah, it's a very participative thing, and in 70 students, you can get to 2/3 of them for sure. I mean, in the literature elective Brett was referencing, I end up with more like about 40 students there. And I think that's nice because it's a slightly smaller group and that can be fun for different reasons. But yeah.
Well, Jerry, we got about 10 minutes here. I want to make sure we have time to talk about some of the things you're working on from a research and publication standpoint. So can you tell us about maybe some recent articles or things that you're thinking about?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, I've got a bunch of studies and papers I'm working on now. I would say the current projects I'm working on from a research standpoint sort of fall into a couple of buckets. One has to do with AI and ethics. So I'm working on with a couple of co-authors, we're working on a kind of a simulation that is comparing the different generative AI models and how ethically robust is their analysis, because there's variance. And some of the companies like Anthropic has sort of positions itself as thinking more carefully about values than, for instance, OpenAI. But whether that's true or not, or whether it shows up in the actual analysis of how do those Gen AI chat bot functions, how do they do analysis? That'll be interesting. So that's in kind of a formative stage. I've got a philosophical paper about ethics and AI that essentially makes the argument that to really anticipate the key ethical questions that AI is going to raise for us, we have to imagine that AI has far more capability than it currently has. And that's what will allow us to sort of imagine, well, what would it be like if AI really could simulate art as well as a human being? I mean, what does that look like? I mean, I'm a big music fan, when you can just punch into an AI prompt, when we reach the day when an AI can generate a song as great as something written by Dylan or Bono, I mean, what does that mean? How do we deal with what it means to be a human being and all of that? So anyhow, that's a little more of a future casting philosophical paper. So I've got some stuff along those lines. I've got another stream of research that has to do essentially with corporate political activity. So I've got a project right now with two colleagues, Mike Lennox and Young Hao, and we're looking at a geographic component of how customers and employees on a sort of geographic basis might influence a company's inclination to say something or not say something that along a kind of a societal, that has a societal implication or a political implication. So in other words, if you look at brick and mortar locations, as a company expands into new parts of the country, let's say they expand into a red state or they expand into a blue state, do you see that start to show up in the rhetoric that you would see on that company's social media feed? Does it make a difference? There's a traditional view that companies take stands on political or social issues because that's a reflection of what the CEO wants to see happen. And I think that definitely happens a lot. But there's another view that it might bubble up from the bottom, that employees and customers want the company to say something about something. And so we're sort of looking at data that could shine a light on whether that's actually true or not. And the short answer is it's true. That the geographic expansion does influence what a company says. And the only real mechanism for that has to be the actual people that are showing up at those brick and mortar locations are having an influence. So anyhow, that's an example of a kind of data-driven project that we're doing. I've got one more that has to do with corporate boards and what really their purpose is and how to think about that. So I'm working with Yo-Jed Chang, a co-author of mine, and another friend at the University of Iowa. So yeah, lots of good things in the work. There's a question in the Q&A about, do students participate in research projects? And the answer is they can. Yes, absolutely. So they can do an independent study and they could write a case. I've done a lot of that with students, second-year MBA students. But if they want to participate on a research project, we could do that. If they want to do something that's sort of a supervised kind of consulting activity, I've got one of those going on right now with a student who's getting ready to go to DuPont. So he's taken a job with DuPont after graduation. But right now he's kind of getting a jump on that job by doing some analysis for DuPont. That's a really interesting strategy question. And he's sort of doing it as a kind of a consulting thing for his future employer. And I'm just supervising that. So yeah, students can drive some of that and they can participate in some of these projects. Absolutely. It's fun when we get students involved. So.
Well, Jared, a couple more questions for you. We always ask, we covered a lot. We talked about your interest in strategy and ethics, and we talked about corporate governance, artificial intelligence, all these kinds of things. But for folks who've gotten interested in some of the topics that we discussed today, are there a few books you might recommend for them to further explore that interest?
Yeah, books. Oh, this is dangerous, Brett. I mean, I even teach a literature course. So how do I narrow it down to a few? Actually, maybe that's a good... There's a couple of novels. So here's a business school professor that's going to recommend you read a little fiction. So this shouldn't surprise you after the previous conversation. But, I think there's a novel that I currently have the ethics through literature students reading. If you really want to think about what it means to be human, there's a great novel by Kazuo Ishiguro called Never Let Me Go, which is a brilliant novel. And it really forces you to think about what makes us human. Is it our emotional lives? Does it have something to do with our biology, or is there something else going on? And I don't want to give away the mechanism from that novel that allows you to think deeply about that. But it's let's just say there's kind of a science fiction element to it. If you want to think about the importance of the little small choices you make every day, there's another novel I had my literature students read called Life After Life by British author Kate Atkinson. And it's kind of a page turner. It's the longest novel I assigned them, but it goes pretty fast. And it's just a brilliant... I don't want to give too much away on that one either, but the protagonist is able to it has a little bit of a Groundhog Day element to it. The protagonist gets to kind of relive their life, and little choices end up having a big impact. And so that's an interesting theme, I think, in that novel. If you want to think about the importance of connection and goodness and sacrifice, I have my students read a novel by Neil Gaiman called Ocean at the End of the Lane. And I love that one. It's a short little novel. So there's some examples. I better at least give you one that's not a fiction recommendation. I really love, recently I read in the last couple of years, one of the nonfiction books that's had a impact on me is a book called How to Know a Person by David Brooks. He's kind of a public intellectual and a pundit, but it really, I think, makes a strong case for how important it is to kind of recapture interpersonal connection, and he makes the case that this is kind of the glue of society. And I think in our increasingly technologically mediated lives, our news feeds and our social media and our phones, and we're just on our screens all the time. I think, I think these basic skills and observations about one-on-one human interaction, I found that book to be really insightful. So we even adopted that one as one of the readings for the Harris Family Book Club. So my sons all read that one, and I don't know. There's some recommendations, Brett. I could keep going, but then we go over.
That's all right. Well, I've never let me go. I got a chance to teach that in the business ethics through literature course. That's what we did when Greg and I taught the course a couple of years ago. Very interesting novel. I'll tell folks, if you're interested in reading that book, do not seek out any interviews with the author prior to reading it, because he is one of those authors that tells you what he thinks the book is about. And so I would just encourage you to, spoiler alert, just read it yourself, then maybe seek out the author interview.
Oh, I'll even go one further. I think that one got made into a movie with Andrew Garfield in it, and it's terrible. So don't see the movie either. You should preserve for yourself the experience of reading that novel. And about 80 pages in, you're going to go like, oh, this is what's going on. And it's pretty cool. So
yeah, it's a great book. All right. You mentioned you're a music fan for music major and from undergrad. You had to pick a handful of albums in a desert island situation. What would you pick?
Oh my gosh, this is impossible, Brett. You're a music fan too, and you and I talk. I mean, look, if I have to just off the cuff, what are a top 3 desert island albums for me? Probably Bruce Cockburn, Dancing in the Dragon's Jaws. In fact, that if I can only take one album with me and that was it, that would be the one. So that maybe that was easy. Emmylou Harris, Wrecking Ball. Neil Young, Comes a Time. Okay, a fourth. How about Patty Larkin, Angels Running? That'd be in a top group for me. Those are good ones. But look, here's a different angle. I mean, what am I listening to lately? Like the last couple of weeks. I mean, Brett, you and I were just talking about this before the webinar started, but I think that U2 just dropped a new EP by surprise called Easter Lily, and I'm obsessed with this opening track on it called Song for Hal. It's just fantastic. The songwriting's fantastic. If you like the Tedeschi Trucks Band, or if you've never heard of the Tedeschi Trucks Band, boy, you'll have a treat for you. You're gonna go down a rabbit hole of listening to them. But they have a new record that came out 2 weeks ago called Future Soul. It's fantastic. There's a track on it called Who Am I? If you only want to listen to one track by the Tedeschi Trucks Band to give you a feel for what they're all about, man, check that one out. And maybe one more that's a recent, the Steel Wheels. They're a favorite band of mine that's from Harrisonburg, Virginia, just over the mountain from Charlottesville. But they dropped a new record just 2 weeks ago, and it is phenomenal. There's a track on there called Cold Call. There's a Darden connection, and it's just put your AirPods in and turn that thing up. Excellent. So, lots of good stuff to listen to.
Well, Jared, thank you for your time today. And to our attendees, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure having you on and being able to interview faculty and hear a little bit more about what they're passionate about, what they're teaching, their interests, all these kinds of things. Come back in May. We're going to have a conversation with a couple faculty members about what Darden means by ethical artificial intelligence. So it should be an interesting conversation. But Jared, thanks for calling in from Idaho Falls, and hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah.
And that was my conversation with Jared Harris from our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series, a series we call Office Hours. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.